To start with, it is so exciting to look back after 15 years of Exchange in the marketplace. Now, some may have worked with earlier beta versions, and so they go back longer than 15 years. Others may take it from the very first shipped version of Exchange, which is on June 11th, 1996, and so they may see it as just under 15 years. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to say 15 years of Exchange in the marketplace. So, where are we at currently, at the time of this video being recorded, with Exchange in the market? Well, according to the Exchange team, Exchange is approaching $2 billion in annual revenues. Now, what that means is, if you were to take Exchange and split it off from Microsoft and make it a standalone business, let's say Exchange Incorporated, it would be the 9th largest software company in the world. Now, that's unbelievable to see how strong Exchange is in the marketplace. Exchange has 65 to 70% of the market share, and it's just growing and growing by millions more each year. In addition to the growth of Exchange in the marketplace, the community that surrounds Exchange is growing as well. And the reason why I mention all of this is because if you're new to Exchange and perhaps a little nervous about what you're getting into, maybe you're a bit apprehensive, thinking, wow, I have so much to learn, well, let me put your mind at ease. Yes, it will be a bit of work to learn Exchange, but this is a messaging solution that is the de facto standard in the market, so you won't regret the time and effort you put into it. In addition, being part of the Exchange world automatically makes you a part of the community that has sprung up around Exchange. The helpful spirit that emanates from the Exchange team at Microsoft through to Exchange MVPs to the community at large, well, it makes us all part of a unified team that you are now becoming a part of. So, in behalf of the rest of the team, let me be the first to say welcome, and let me catch you up to speed on what Exchange has been doing from the very beginning. Let's take a look back at the humble beginnings of Exchange and see how it has grown to be so well liked by businesses and administrators alike. Most people think that Exchange started with the 4.0 public release, but in actuality it began in 1993 with a system called Xenix. Now, this was the legacy system that Microsoft was using internally, and so around 1993 Microsoft started to make the move over to the Exchange-based messaging system that they were developing. Within 2 years, about 500 companies were using a beta version of Exchange, and just before the public release, there were about 32,000 using the beta. Then Microsoft released the 4.0 version as a replacement for Microsoft Mail 3.5. The exciting part here, because I know you're probably thinking, where is the exciting part in all of this? Well, the exciting part is that this was the start of using the X500 standards for the directory service, which was implemented with Exchange. Okay, so you might be thinking, again, where's the exciting part? Well, for those of you who know Active Directory, perhaps you've worked with Active Directory, well, Active Directory is a directory service that's built on LDAP standards. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP. There's a set of standards that go along with the protocol, and the two together are what help Active Directory to work. So Active Directory is built off of LDAP. Well, LDAP actually is built off of a set of standards called the X500 standards. And so with the release of Exchange, there was also the release of a directory service that went with Exchange. And this was all built off of the X500 standards, which, as I just mentioned, is the predecessor to the LDAP standards, which is what Active Directory is based off of. Does that sound exciting to you? Well, it's exciting to me because it's nice to see the evolution of things, not just with Exchange, but also we can see how Active Directory evolved from Exchange itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Going back to the 4.0 release, that was in 1996. 1997 saw the next release of Exchange, which was the 5.0 version. Now, this allowed access to networks based on Simple Mail Transport Protocol, or SMTP. This was the first time that this was integrated in the Exchange product. 5.0 also saw the release of the Exchange Web Access feature. Now, we might know that today as Outlook Web Access, which is how you might connect to your Exchange server through your web browser. So that was first implemented in the 5.0 version. Soon after that, in November of 1997, we had Exchange 5.5. This included both a standard and an enterprise edition. The difference between the two versions involved items like the database size, transport connectors, clustering possibilities, and so the Enterprise Edition was the stronger of the two. There was support included for IMAP and LDAP version 3 clients, and the directory service that we talked about earlier, well, that continued to evolve up to the point that it was then converted and changed over into Active Directory with the release of Microsoft Server 2000. So here we see Exchange starting off small. It starts in-house at Microsoft, and that's what Microsoft calls eating their own dog food, because they test it out on themselves first. They make sure it's all working fine before they start sending it off to the public. And then we see in 96, the first version of Exchange is released, and in 97 we have Exchange 5.5. So now let's move forward to the year 2000. The release of Exchange 2000 took place in November of 2000. And it was exciting because it was built with Active Directory in mind. Active Directory had been released earlier that year with the release of Microsoft Server 2000. So this would ultimately be a good thing, but at the time many were not so sure that they wanted to go with Active Directory. So they may have held off deploying Exchange 2000 right away. Instead, they continued to work with their 5.5 Exchange servers, and that led to a conflict between the two directories, because Exchange 5.5 had its own directory, and then you had Active Directory if you were implementing that directory service at the same time. And so there were Active Directory connectors that would allow you to coexist with Exchange 5.5 so that you could move directory information back and forth. Let's say you spent a lot of time typing in all of that directory information. So what are we talking about here? What is directory information? Well, if you implemented an earlier version of Exchange, then you might have spent time typing in people's names, addresses, phone numbers, information of that sort into your Exchange directory. Well, now you have Active Directory, so what are you going to do? Thousands of people, are you going to re-enter all of those names into the Active Directory? That would be somewhat frustrating. But with Active Directory provided a connector that allowed you to connect to your Exchange 5.5 and pull all of that information over. And then in actuality, you can actually synchronize the two so that information put in Active Directory would go over to 5.5 and vice versa. Now this was very important because there was no in-place upgrade solution to Exchange 2000. The two messaging systems, if you wanted to go from 5.5 to 2000, well, they had to sit side by side in a state of coexistence, and that's what all of these connectors were for. Now, in addition, if you're an Exchange administrator that goes back to the days of Exchange 2000, you may remember being excited about instant messaging being included with Exchange. Well, that only lasted a little while, and then it was pulled out and put into Office Live Communication Server, which is now called Office Communication Server, or OCS for short. But with the Exchange 2000 release, you were able to do in-house instant messaging until that was pulled out in the 2003 release. And so here's a look at the Exchange System Manager, and in here you can see that we have our servers, and underneath the server we have storage groups, we have our mailbox store, here's the public folder store. So you can see that the tool set was evolving as well. If you used any of the earlier tools from 4.0 to 5.5, it was somewhat cumbersome in terms of working with Exchange, but now you can see that they're starting to use this console approach. And in this video, we'll show you how it continues the evolution process right up to our day. Now, in September of 2003, Exchange Server 2003 was released to the public. The major enhancements seem to revolve around better disaster recovery and clustering features. So there were features like dial tone recovery, recovery groups, database backup through the Volume Shadow Copy service, which is not something that was included directly in the product. In actuality, you still needed a third-party backup solution, but all of the components were in place for that third-party solution to work properly. 8-node clustering was also supported. In addition, anti-spam and antivirus improvements were made. Now you had integrated IP block and allow lists, Exchange Server intelligent message filtering, support for sender ID. Now, a lot of that may be a bit over your head in terms of you may not know what any of these things are all about, and that's okay. It's hard to be an expert on everything. Basically, the point is that Exchange was evolving, and it was including things that showed that it was evolving with the internet itself. You remember back in the early days, there was no such thing as spam. But as messaging grew, spam and virus attacks started to come in through our email. And so Exchange started to meet that challenge with 2003 by providing additional anti-spam and antivirus improvements. And this continues all the way through to the Exchange 2010 release. There were also enhancements in Outlook Web Access and mobile messaging. For example, Exchange ActiveSync. This allows your mobile devices to connect to your Exchange server. Well, again, with the evolution of these devices, if you think 10 years ago, most people didn't even have these kinds of devices. They didn't even exist. And even though we had cell phones and things, they didn't really have the capabilities that we have today. And so starting in 2003, there were leaps in mobile messaging technologies, including Exchange ActiveSync. There was also an inclusion of direct push of email, calendar, contacts, and tasks. And there are a host of other features, including the introduction of dynamic distribution lists and so forth. Now, some of these features were actually only added with service packs. So, for example, the use of the Exchange Server Intelligent Message Filter, that came with Service Pack 1. Content updates for the IMF, that came with Service Pack 2. The support for sender ID and the direct push of email, well, all of that came with Service Pack 2 as well. So all of this didn't just come out in Exchange 2003, but as the service packs were released, we saw these features added in because Microsoft was trying to keep up with the various circumstances of the times. They were also looking at some strong competition. For example, in the world of mobile messaging, the BlackBerry has come on the scene, and so Microsoft is looking to try to compete with some of their features, like the direct push feature. Now, some people would say, oh, that's the difference between a BlackBerry and a Microsoft mobile device. But in actuality, that feature has been included in Exchange since Service Pack 2 of Exchange 2003. And here we have the Exchange 2003 System Manager. You can see that there's a little bit of evolution in the System Manager, and that has to do with the way that Exchange is structured. So now we have these administrative groups, and there are also these routing groups. You can still see your servers, your storage group, your mailbox store, your public folder store. So it hasn't changed all that much, but you can see that the product has evolved somewhat between the Exchange 2000 and Exchange 2003 system managers. November of 2006 saw the release of Exchange 2007, and it was an exciting change in the way we work with Exchange. For starters, we have not one, but two management tools that we're going to show you in a moment. There's the Exchange Management Console with a built-in toolbox, and there's the Exchange Management Shell, which is built off of PowerShell. From a hardware perspective, we have a new move to a 64-bit only platform. Well, it's both the hardware and the software that have to be 64-bit. This also means no in-place upgrades of Exchange 2000 or 2003 over to 2007, so they must coexist and then transition over time. Now, there are 5 server roles with Exchange 2007, including the Mailbox Server, the Client Access Server, the Hub Transport Server, the Edge Transport Server, and the Unified Messaging role. And we're going to discuss all of these different roles in greater detail as we move forward. We also saw with Exchange 2007 the addition of 3 high availability options: local continuous replication, cluster continuous replication, and single copy clusters. In actuality, single copy clusters is actually a throwback to Exchange 2003. Now, don't worry too much about these high availability options. We're going to explain what these are in a future lesson. We'll break it down, we'll explain what continuous replication is, and we'll show you how it's used in Exchange 2010. There have been some changes in how it all works. In addition, there were all sorts of incredible new features like anti-spam agents. There's actually 9 of them on the Hub Transport or Edge Transport server roles. Database portability was added for recovering to any server within your organization. Per-user device policies for mobile messaging. Active Directory site-based routing, so things like routing groups, which you saw in the last administrative console, well, those were yanked out. Now the entire structure for routing messages in Exchange is built off of your Active Directory site topology. And Auto Discover. This is a feature that comes to life when it's used with Outlook 2007. Here you can see the Exchange Management Console. It's broken down into items like organization configuration, server configuration, recipient configuration, and then on top of that you have your different server roles, as you can see here. If you're wondering why the Edge Transport server role is not included here amongst the four, that's because the Edge Transport server has to be installed on a separate server altogether outside of your Active Directory organization. So it sits in the DMZ or the perimeter network in between your firewall and your internal organization. So we'll talk about that more a little bit later, but if you notice that it's missing, there's a good reason for it. You can also see here the toolbox that has been included right within the Exchange Management Console. That comes in real handy when you have a problem. In addition, we have here the Exchange Management Shell, and it's a method of managing your Exchange environment through the command line. Now, it's true there are certain things that you only want to do through the Exchange Management Console, and sometimes it's easier to work through the GUI, but when it comes to doing things in bulk, or at times in Exchange, there are things you can only do through the Exchange Management Shell. Well, that's when you want to come here, and for some it may be a whole new way of doing things through the command line, but in a future video we're going to talk you through this and we'll help you to get started with working with the EMS. When Exchange 2007 Service Pack 1 was released, there were 3 exciting new features that were released with it. Now that's not to say these were the only features, but these were the features that people were really hoping for the most out of Exchange 2007. So for starters, there was the Public Folder Management Console. Now, this was important because in Exchange 2007 RTM, there was no public folder management. If you wanted to manage the public folder structure, you had to go through the Exchange Management Shell. And so that had people a little bit upset because now they had to learn PowerShell commandlets right off the bat if they wanted to manage their public folder structure. And so some felt that Microsoft was doing this just to get them to move over to SharePoint. But the Exchange team heard the plea of their customers and came up with the Public Folder Management Console, which is located right in your toolbox in Exchange 2007 Service Pack 1. In addition, a new high availability option was added to the mix, so we have Standby Continuous Replication, SCR, added to Exchange 2007. That provided for site resiliency to the list of high availability solutions. That brings the number to 4 now. And there was also a slew of new active sync policy settings that were added. So if you worked with the RTM of Exchange and you know a little bit about active sync, these are the policies that relate to your mobile devices. Now with the RTM you can implement 16 policy settings. But Service Pack 1 brings the quantity and quality up to a whole new level. It offers 27 settings for the standard client access license and 43 for the enterprise client access license. So Service Pack 1 brought with it quite a bit. Then in the middle of 2009, Service Pack 2 was added, and with it there was a major feature improvement. It included Exchange Volume Snapshot Backup Functionality. Now, there were a lot of different things that are related to this. It's a long story. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. But basically, with every Exchange product, we had the ability right within Server to do a backup of Exchange. Not a great backup, not the kind of backup that you would want to use in a major enterprise environment perhaps, but certainly a good backup for small businesses, a good backup for testing purposes, and Exchange 2007, if installed on Server 2003, the backup worked just fine. But with Server 2008, the backup did not work, so that was frustrating. Instead, you would have to go with a third-party solution, or you'd have to go with Microsoft's System Center Data Protection Manager, which is a whole nother product. It's a great product, it works great, but sometimes we don't want to have to purchase another product, especially if our budget is restricted. So with Exchange 2007 Service Pack 2, we now have the ability returned to us to do a backup, not just a backup, but a volume snapshot backup of our Exchange structure. There are some serious stipulations to the use of this add-in. There's stipulations as far as the fact that it's only VSS based, so you can't do ESE streaming backups. There's other stipulations as far as the fact that the backups are on a volume level. They're not backups of the storage group or database or mailbox. No, just the volume itself. So it would be nice to have a more granular backup than what the Exchange 2007 Service Pack 2 backup tool provides, but it still is a big change over what we had before, because before we couldn't do a backup at all in Server 2008. So we're happy with the improvement. Other features include enhanced auditing, dynamic AD schema update and validation, public folder quota management, centralized organizational settings, named properties commandlet, new interface for diagnostic logging. So you can see Service Pack 2 included quite a bit. And that brings us up to, drum roll please, Exchange 2010. Now in future videos we're going to go into greater detail of most of these items here, but for the sake of an initial introduction we're just going to list them out. So with Exchange 2010 we have new rights protected email with Active Directory RMS, that's Rights Management Services. This includes transport rules for AD RMS protection, persistent protection of attachments in rights protected messages, and so forth. There's also some new transport and routing functionality. There's a new permissions model. There's a new high availability solution. So here we talked about those 4 solutions, the 3 that came with Exchange 2007, one actually going all the way back to 2003. Well, now going forward here, instead of the 4 high availability solutions that we had starting with Service Pack 1 of Exchange 2007, there's a whole new storage architecture. It's been completely revised. The high availability solutions have been morphed now into a single high availability solution, and it's all under what they call DAG groups. And so we're going to discuss this in a future video. Exciting stuff to talk about. There are new compliance features. There's new Outlook web access features, new unified messaging features, a new web management interface, new administrative functionality to the EMC and EMS. So we really have some exciting things to look forward to with Exchange Server 2010. And that's what this series is designed to do, get you started, introduce you to Exchange Server 2010. Whether you've worked with Exchange before in the past or not, these videos are going to really catch you up to speed with what Exchange 2010 brings to the table. And so here you can see what the Exchange Management Console looks like in Exchange Server 2010. Now we're going to have an entire lesson on working with the Exchange Management Console as well as the Exchange Management Shell. But it's good for you to see what you're going to be working with. So this is the new console that was introduced with Exchange 2007. As you can see here, we have organization configuration. You have server configuration where you can configure items that relate specifically to the servers. And then here we have recipient configuration. That's where you can take a look at your mailboxes, distribution groups, contacts. You can take a look at disconnected mailboxes or create move requests. And then right down here is our toolbox. So you see, it's not as scary as you might think. And here we have post-installation tasks. So right after you complete an installation, you might want to look at some deployment tasks, end-to-end scenario, additional post-installation tasks. But also, do you remember that community spirit that I talked about at the beginning of this video? Well, you can see right here, there's a tab called Community Resources, and here you can see recent posts on the Microsoft Exchange team blog. So this is really a great feature that is right here for you, right within the Exchange Management Console. The EMC is your GUI command center, and then we have the Exchange Management Shell, which will open up here. And here you can see it welcomes you to the Exchange Management Shell. It gives you a list of different commandlets to get you started. It gives you a tip of the day. And from here you can get started using the Exchange Management Shell, which is based upon PowerShell. Again, we're going to learn more about these 2 management tools in a future lesson. This was just to give you a bit of an overview.